Hi everyone, I hope that you had a fantastic weekend. I'm super stoked to teach today's lesson. Biology is my favorite unit ever to teach. My background is in biology and math, and I just think that given today's climate and everything that's happening, biology is 100% all around us, and what our cells can do, and what animals can do, and what plants can do. All of this stuff is super, super neat. So, in grade 10 biology, we talk about the idea of tissues and how tissues make organs, and organs come together to make systems of anything that is alive. So, I have all of those things like tissues and plant organs and systems inside plants, but we also see those inside of animals. And I know that when I was sitting in this massive lecture hall my first year of university, so that would have been 2008, my first year of university. And I'm sitting there and we're learning about the idea of biology, and it's just fascinating that every animal, every single vertebrae, so any animal that has a spine, is organized in the exact same way. So that kind of hints to us this idea that we all came from the same place at some point in time because the organization is all the same. And we see this similar organizations in different cells, so even plant cells and things like that. So biology is beyond fascinating. And like I said, just given today's current climate, this is something that is super relevant. So let's talk about our first lesson here. And our first lesson that we are going to talk about is the idea of plants and animals. So we need to talk about three super important things revolving around the idea of cell theory. And in order for us to have living things, in order for us to be alive, in order for us to have awesome pets like crazy cats who are staring at me, and awesome little weenie dogs, and everything else in life like plants and viruses, well, virus isn't living, but any of those single cell things, we need to understand that all living things are made up of one or more cells. Okay? So we can have singular celled unicellular objects. We can also have multicellular objects. So this is actually an example of tomato cells. And the cell is the simplest, so the tiniest unit that can carry out all of life's processes. So all of the processes in life are carried out by a cell, and we can't break it down into anything smaller than that. Cells all come from pre-existing cells. So in order for us to have cells, we need to have some cells to work with. And it's just a super fascinating idea. So I'm going to post this link on our Google Classroom. I want you to watch it. It's just an introduction to cells. And basically what it's talking about in here is that cells can be classified, organisms can be classified based on whether their cells have a nucleus and organelles or not. Okay, so an organelle sounds like organ. So an organelle is just a specialized part of a cell that has a specific job to do. It has this intense function to do. So, for instance, if its job is to, let's just say, a muscle cell, it's going to have to contract and release. And this is what allows us to use our muscles. That's why we can get muscle spasms. So, that muscle cell, its only job is to contract and release. Okay? Based on this, we can break things down further. So we can have a prokaryotic cell. And here, anything that's prokaryotic is single celled. So it's unicellular. So that just means that we are dealing with something that is single cell. Okay, it's all by itself. These cells will never have a nucleus. So this is super important. They never have a nucleus. They also will not have any membranes, so there's nothing binding them. So they have this, membrane-bound organelles. They never have any specialized cells inside of them. And that makes sense, because if they're single cell, then how do they have specialized cells inside of them? Okay. An example of something that is I'm not sure what I did there. An example of something that is prokaryotic is a bacteria cell. So in bacteria, there's lots of important functions here, but you will notice that there is no nucleus. There's no tiny little disc that holds all of the DNA. Instead, its DNA is what we call nucleoid. So it's all of these ribbons in here, and they're all kind of spread out like spaghetti, like a clump of spaghetti. They have liquid, which we call cytoplasm. They have little dots in here, which are ribosomes. Ribosomes are super important for making proteins. They have plasma membrane, so there is a little slight membrane in here holding that whole package together. It's like an envelope. A cell wall, so that there's more structure there so that this membrane can't spill out. It has a bacteria capsule, kind of like a pill capsule to make sure that everything's in, because bacteria cells don't have skin. So in human bodies, our skin are the reason why we can hold everything inside and keep everything kind of functioning properly. And they have these tiny little hair-like things, which we call pila, and a tail that whips around to help move it, because a bacteria cell doesn't have legs. And so in order for it to move around, it has this flagellum. Okay? Eukaryotic cells are different than prokaryotic cells because they are more complicated. So you're going to see here that now we can have membrane-bound nuclei, so they're going to have nucleus in them, and they're also going to have these specialized cells, which we said we call organelles. So they're membrane-bound, and there's organelles. Okay. Examples of eukaryotic cells are things that we see all the time, like fungi and plants and animals. Okay, so anything that's a fungus, so the plural of fungus is fungi, anything that's a plant, anything that's an animal, these are all going to be eukaryotic. They need multiple cells to make them function. I'm going to post this handout on Google Classroom. Okay, in summary, this is how we organize our cells. So there is a hierarchy here. And in this hierarchy, we start with cells being living things, and we can split that into single cells or more than one cells. Anything that only has one cell is going to be unicellular. Anything that has more than one cell is going to be called multicellular. The unicellular things, those can be prokaryotic and eukaryotic. So we can see single-celled things having no nuclei or no membrane-bound organelles. There's also special types of eukaryotes, so special types of single-cells organisms that can have a nucleus and organelles, and it happens all in one spot. However, most complicated cells are going to be, or most complicated animals or organisms are going to be things that have multiple cells. Okay, so this is going to be the most common type of eukaryote we see. And that means that they're going to have cells that have both a nucleus and organelles. So a nucleus and cells that have a specific function. So let's talk about how we talk or decide what's different between an animal and a plant cell. So if I'm just looking at these two cells in an overview right now, you can see that their shapes look different. For instance, an animal cell characteristically has this rounder shape, whereas a plant cell, and let's be honest, an animal cell can actually look not so symmetrical or spherical like this. It can look more flat, but a plant cell has this characteristic rectangular shape. There's a couple of reasons for that. So if we go back to our animal cell, there's also some other characteristics. So if I notice here, this membrane, it's not as thick as if I was looking here between my animal cell or my plant cell. And that's because my plant cell actually has this thing called a cell wall, whereas an animal cell doesn't have that. So let's think bigger picture here. What's different? What are some key characteristics that are different between just an animal and a plant? Well, an animal, they all tend to have these things like skin. We have bones. Animals have bones to help kind of give us a skeletal structure, whereas plants, they don't really have those things. So that's why their cells need to be a little bit more structured and more thick with that cellular wall. Okay, so let's talk about some of the specifics. So in the animal cell, we have some key features here. For instance, all of this that's in between the cells, that's kind of like a gooey little liquid, and we call that cytoplasm. So this is called cytoplasm. The cytoplasm helps to keep everything, kind of all of the nutrients and everything locked into the cell. It also makes sure that the cell doesn't get super dried out. Okay? As we go along the cell, you're going to see that there's a lot of different, like, funny looking things that are these squiggly little shapes that look like this. So they're all the pink things in this cell. And in here, this is actually the Golgi bodies, or the Golgi apparatus you might see in some textbooks. And the Golgi bodies are actually a series of flattened sacs, and their whole purpose is to collect and process materials that any of the cells might secrete. So things like protein packages. And proteins are super important for our body so that we can function, right? Moving along clockwise, we actually have this little bit right here. That's the cell membrane, so the outer bit of the cell. The cell membrane is kind of like the skin of the cell. So that's going to lock everything in place. It's kind of like a ziplock where all of the nice stuff can stay in one spot. The cell membrane also helps to give the cell a little bit more structure. Okay, it's super flexible, it's usually double layered, and it controls the movement of materials in and out of the cell. So think of, if you open the Ziploc a little bit, you can control how much air comes in and out of the Ziploc bag. Okay, that's the same purpose as the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane is something that we call selectively permeable. What that means is that only certain things can pass through this membrane. That makes sure that these big organelles, the most important parts of the cell, they're not going to voluntarily go through that cell membrane unless something happens, like we crush the cell. Okay. Moving on, we have these other little squiggly structures. They almost look like a peanut. Okay, these are our mitochondria, and you guys probably remember this, as most students do from grade 8. The mitochondria, for plural, are the powerhouse of the cell. Well, what does that mean? You all know that it's the powerhouse of the cell. It's this large oval sac that's going to help to give energy to the cell. And where do animals get energy from? That's right, our cellular respiration. So this is where that happens. So we're actually making glucose, or converting glucose into what we call that energy unit in here. Okay, and if you took science with me last year, we called that ATP. Moving on, we have this large disc structure in the middle. That is going to be our nucleus. Yes, I did just realize I missed one. We'll go back there. The nucleus is where all of the DNA and the important information, it's like the brain of the cell. Okay? It's spherical. It's usually a little bit flattened, but you will see that it is spherical. And it has, like I said, all of the DNA. It's also going to control all of the awesome activities inside of that cell. If we move backwards, because the one that I missed right here, this is actually the vacuole of the cell. And the vacuole is just like a vacuum. You'll notice that the cell, it doesn't have anywhere to store waste or to kind of export waste. So that's what this vacuole does. It, just like a vacuum bag, it's going to store all of the waste of the cell. Okay. What else? The vacuole is super full of fluid. It's like a fluid-filled sac. In animal cells, there's a lot of small vacuoles. They can grow inside. You're going to have many of them in animal cells, and that's something that's a little bit different in plant cells. Okay. Moving forward, we have the little structures, these little highways that are kind of surrounding the nucleus, and these are called the endoplasmic reticulum. And the endoplasmic reticulum we can shorten to reticulum, to ER. And the ER is actually a 3D network of branching tubes, and they're like the highways inside of the cell. They help to transport materials throughout the whole cell. Okay, so those are kind of all the way around here. Attached to these, you'll notice, are these little kind of dots. And these little dots right here, if we zoom in, those are ribosomes. And ribosomes are really important for creating proteins. So they're small, they're spherical, so like a tennis ball shape, and they are the reason why we are able to make proteins. Okay? And you can ignore this one right here. It's just pointing to the similar shapes inside of there. Okay, so this is an animal cell. These are the key kind of players inside of an animal cell. So now let's talk maybe a little bit about this plant cell. So in a plant cell, we have some different structures. Some of them are the same. So for instance, we still have a nucleus. It's going to perform the same structure because these are eukaryotic, so they're complex. We have a nucleus, we have an ER. Okay, so those transport cells, those are all here. We still have a mitochondria. They still need to get energy, but remember here, our energy that's going to be involved in that photosynthesis process. We are still going to have our, our Golgi bodies. Okay. Moving over, you still have cytoplasm. This large thing in the center, though, a lot of students often think that this is the nucleus, but it's not. And we can tell that this isn't the nucleus because I don't have this like structured highways surrounding it, okay? So here, this is a fluid-filled sac. And you'll notice that there's only one of them and they're quite large. This is the plant cell's vacuole. And in a plant cell, they have large vacuoles because they don't have a skeletal structure to help give those cells and give the plant a backbone. So this vacuole actually helps to provide structural support in the plant cell. Okay. We also have something unique here, and if you're looking here, you see that yes, we have our cell membrane, which is right here. Okay. And so in the cell membranes, we have our cell membrane. Does the same things, it holds in that cell, but we also have a cell wall. And the cell wall is kind of the same idea as that vacuole. It helps to keep everything structured. The cell wall is the reason why these plant cells will actually always look like a rectangular shape. There's very few oval or disc-shaped plant cells, which is something that is unique to this structure. And then of course we have this green kind of disc-filled structure, and green like the leaves that we see, and we know that plants have chloroplasts, which animal cells do not. Okay, so the chloroplasts are key components for capturing that sun's energy during the photosynthesis process. And this is how the plant is going to be able to make its own food. Okay, notice too that in often cases, our chloroplasts and our mitochondria are very close together. All right. Okay. So this is our plant and our animal cells. Okay, so there's some similarities and differences. I have talked about everything that is down here. Feel free to read through this in the notes. So again, you can pause the video, read through it, go up. I've made sure to put through the key components right here so you can see, have a snapshot of them right beside there. Okay. And again, like I said, I've talked through all of this in the video. So up to you. You might want to copy this down. This is a good idea. Copy it down. Copy what they mean down. Or if you're printing the notes, you can do that as well. I'm going to post the section of the homework here in that textbook, that online textbook. Again, it's a different textbook than what you're using. I already have this sectioned off. I want you to look at numbers 1 to 8. You don't have to answer them in full sentences. Just kind of see if it makes sense when you're reading these questions. And we really just need to have an understanding of the differences between a plant and an animal cell. So I hope that you guys are kind of starting to see that biology is fascinating. Like I said, it's happening all around us. Plants and animal cells are super important to each other. So not only do animals often need plants to survive in terms of finding food as a resource, but we know from grade 9 science, from ecology unit, that plants make up such a vast portion of our ecosystems. So this is why they are really, they go hand in hand. So it's important that we have an understanding of both of them. It's also springtime, so a lot of people are starting to plant seeds right now. We're starting to see that the frost is starting to lighten. So it's cool to kind of understand how these things work. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about cell division, which is right here. And cell division is super important, so I'm excited to talk about that. It can also be followed by some scary stuff like cancer, so just to brace yourself that might be part of the discussion tomorrow. But yeah, so I hope that you found the introduction to biology super exciting, and I can't wait to hear from you guys this week. I can't wait for you to tell me how your weekends were, and please check in. And again, I posted an updated mark, so if you have any questions about that, just email me and check in. Have a great day, guys.